Greetings, Benazir.
How are you, David?
Very well indeed, and yourself too, I trust. How is the Pakistan you now see different from the Pakistan you left 8 years ago?
I do believe Pakistan is under increasing threat of an extremist takeover. And to save the country, I believe we must restore democracy.
Benazir Bhutto returns to Pakistan today after 8 years in exile, defying warnings of an assassination by Al-Qaeda and vowing to restore democracy to a homeland.
I would like to thank all of you who are here and accompanying us on the plane journey back home. This is a very critical moment in Pakistan's history.
There is real threat to the life of Mohtarma Benazir. There are credible and corroborated intelligence reports that terrorist groups are out to target Mohtarma Benazir Bhutto. The government is advising her to avoid long public exposures.
I'm unaware of the details of the security arrangement, but I think the biggest protection comes from God. And God willing, all will go well.
You think that Benazir Bhutto will have a third term as Prime Minister of Pakistan?
Well, this is up to the people of Pakistan. I've served them before, and it would be a privilege for me and an honor for me to serve them again.
We are here just for the Mohtarma Benazir Bhutto.
Are you from Karachi?
Yeah.
All from Karachi? What was that? What was that? Attack?
On August 14, 1947, a new nation was born.
Pakistan, created by separating the Muslim regions of India from the Hindu.
History is made. A people rejoice. Independence for India and Pakistan.
When the British begin their departure, an era ends and a new era begins.
As the new dominions of Pakistan and India take over their own affairs, millions began a journey that over the months was to become the greatest mass migration in history.
The country was born in confusion.
People who thought they were in Pakistan suddenly realised that they actually were in India.
The rapes and brutal mass murders during partition affected both India and Pakistan.
Anywhere from 200,000 to 1 million dead.
Many will never reach their new land.
More than 60 languages are spoken.
The national language became Urdu.
But English is the official language, used in business, government and legal contracts.
It is the Muslim faith which holds the nation together.
Tension between Hindus and Muslims of India always ran high.
When India and Pakistan won their independence,
The partition led almost immediately to disputes.
Pakistan's very existence depended largely on adequate military strength should the dispute with India assume uncontrollable proportions.
The borderland Kashmir has been a disputed territory ever since.
the UN succeeds in obtaining a ceasefire.
Pakistan has never managed to get control of all of Kashmir.
You're making it very clear to both Pakistan and India that war will not serve their interests.
More than half of Pakistan's 63-year history has been spent under military rule.
A shortage of jobs, of justice, of good schools, of electricity and running water are the state's everyday failures.
Pakistan has achieved a literacy rate of only 67% for men, only 42% for women.
Government spending on education is just a small fraction of government spending on the military.
Money was pumped into weapons and into Pakistan's religious seminaries or madrasas.
For years, theirs has been a radical, ultra-conservative message.
Those same madrasas would go on to produce the extreme Islamist Taliban movement.
Honor killings, a traditional cultural practice, are widespread and legal.
Murder has been condoned by the state in the case of these barbaric killings.
The school was closed
19
at the
people were
time.
killed in the explosion, more than 50 wounded, among the dead at least 4 police officers, often in the front line.
The militants' campaign is ferocious and widespread.
After 9/11, things changed dramatically.
Pakistan, a country with an extensive nuclear arsenal, is facing a very serious security challenge. In 1953, 6 years after the birth of Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto was born.
I was born on June 24th, 1953. My mother says nobody came to see her for 3 days in the hospital when I was born because they were all in mourning. So the girl had been born. I remember once you mentioned to me that even the dogs were giving birth to boys and even the cats were giving birth to boys. Benazir. So my mother never liked that name either. She made me grow up thinking, I want to keep her name Naila. Naila is such a lovely name, Naila is such a pretty name, but they gave this horrible, ugly name, Benazir.
Benazir means without compare. B means without. Nazir is like, I guess, vision or comparison. Basically it means unique, one of a kind. And boy, did she turn out that way.
I am what I am because I am Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's daughter.
Bhutto was the quintessential charismatic personality. He was young, educated.
Zulfikar Bhutto was really a man of the world. He went to USC, and then he transferred to Berkeley, and then he went on to Oxford. And he wanted to be taken seriously on the global stage.
Bhutto was appointed to represent Pakistan at the United Nations. He was able to bring Pakistan in the middle of a lot of global discussions.
I think Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, what he had that made him so special was incredible eloquence, great belief in himself, and then a serious ability to do backroom deals.
Something that is very famous in Pakistan psyche, Bhutto, when he came to Washington, D.C. and met with Kennedy, Kennedy told him, Mr. Bhutto, if you were an American, you'll be in my cabinet. Bhutto retorted back saying that, Mr. President, if I was an American, I'll be in your place. Here's a guy who goes to the White House and tells an American president that, you know what, I am better than you. He wanted to make sure that when he wasn't in the camera, his crease was fine in his pants, that he always wore the right set of clothes, that he always wore the right cologne. And every young man wanted to copy him. Whatever he wore became a fashion. Very flamboyant. He was the GQ of Pakistan.
Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was courting my aunt, Nusrat.
The minute my father saw my mother, who was so absolutely gorgeous, I think he flipped and was love at first sight.
I remember my mother being glamorous, well-dressed, and, so competent.
Nusrat was not only a wife, but a close partner of Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. She advised him extensively.
She was Iranian, and she was more modern than the average Pakistani woman. She famously drove a car when Muslim women were not driving cars at all.
The social consciousness of both parents was so powerful that it influenced all the children, not only Benazir, but Shahnawaz, Sanam, and Murtaza. It was like they were going to leave a legacy behind them so that the children could carry on, could carry forward. There was a reason why they were called the Kennedys of Pakistan.
Zulfikar's father, Shahnawaz Bhutto, profited from partition. He received from the new Pakistan a gigantic tract of land, larger than they can imagine, like Los Angeles County.
We were landowners, large landowners. My father was telling me, look at the way these people sweat in the heat and in the sun in the fields. It is because of their sweat that you will have the opportunity to be educated. And you have a debt to these people. You've got to come back and pay that debt by serving your people.
In a feudal system, everyone is beholden to the master. And this is what Zulfikar Bhutto, Benazir's father, came from, and what he was trying to change so that there could be some progress in Pakistan. He saw that countries that do well economically have to have some kind of a middle class that give the people the opportunity to move upwards.
For Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, education was the key for everything, not only for his own children, but for the people of Pakistan, because he knew with education, people will be able to stand on their own feet. They'll be productive members of society, and you can create democracy.
It was my father who was against the gender constraints of my time. He enabled me to appreciate that a woman is not a lesser creature.
I wore the veil once. When I was 13 years old, it's really like an initiation right into the world of adulthood. I remember when I wore it, it's hot, it's cumbersome, it's long, you trip over it. You can see the world through that black fabric. And it's not a clear world, it's a muted grayish world. Papa and Mommy were in their bedroom. And Mommy said, Pinky wore her burqa. I made her wear it for the first time. Then he was quiet for a while, quite thoughtful. Then he just looked up, said there's no need for her to wear it. It was an extremely bold step for him to take, because until that time, no woman from the Bhutto family who reached adulthood had ever gone without burqa.
Not too long ago, I sat where you now sit, tramping to class in subarctic temperatures, fighting for books at Hillis Library, cramming for exams.
I met her first day of freshman year at Harvard. She was 16, I was 18.
She was quiet, she was studious, she made a small circle of friends, but this was 1969, and 6 months of her arrival, all the dorms went co-ed.
We were in the same dorm. She talked a lot about her own family. We have a lot in common. Benazir comes from a political family. She was very interested in politics, was interested in the world.
Not only was she becoming a grown-up, but she was independent for the first time, and her life was under her control, and no one else could control it, not Mummy, not Daddy, just Benazir.
This was the height of the Vietnam War, and she saw firsthand the power of the people to change a policy and to bring down a government.
She was very much exposed to the ideas of equal rights for women, and that was something that very much influenced her life.
It was the first time that I was in an environment where women were treated as full participants in society. It was that early experience, perhaps more than anything else, that shaped my political being.
India and Pakistan, of course, have fought numerous wars, but I think none was more bitter than the War of 1971.
India dismembered Pakistan, it split East and West Pakistan, East Pakistan becoming Bangladesh.
The loss was a humiliation to Pakistan. Not only had their geography changed, but their national sense of self was changed.
East Pakistan was a part of Pakistan, made with our own blood and our own sweat. If India thinks that she's rubbing Pakistan nose to the ground and that Pakistan can come to a settlement in the way that she's behaving and has behaved in the past, that will then not bring about agreement. There will be endless bloodshed and confusion and chaos.
Bhutto was immediately rushed to the United Nations to negotiate peace with India.
It was great drama for the UN in its relatively young phase.
Yesterday, my 11-year-old son telephoned me from Karachi, and he said to me, "Do not come back. It's a document of surrender. We do not want to see you back in Pakistan if you come like that. We will fight. We'll go back and fight. My country hearkens for me. Why should I waste my time here in the Security Council? You can take your Security Council. Here you are. I'm going."
The UN was not going to intervene on the side of Pakistan. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto made it very clear that Pakistan would not surrender. He didn't come to New York to surrender. That propelled him into a very strong national figure.
Bhutto could rally the masses, mesmerize the masses.
हमने मंजूर करो 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 कह कह के मंजूर नहीं किया। अरे समझ जाओ लोगों, समझ जाओ।
He formed Pakistan People's Party. To form Pakistan People's Party, he had a very simple, very popular slogan: food, clothes, and shelter. People of Pakistan were hurting because of the poverty, lack of education. There was no hope of prosperity.
Bhutto just swept the polls. People were waiting for change.
People who chanted the meaning of Pakistan is food, clothing, and shelter won the elections with massive majority.
He was the leader. Every organization, army, everybody was supporting him throughout.
He moved rapidly to make peace with India. Certainly his greatest diplomatic triumph was the Simla Accords.
I met Mrs. Gandhi in 1972 when I accompanied my father to Simla. I was wearing my first sari and I was very concerned that I might trip over the sari and it would come undone in front of all the international photographers.
I provided the interest in India. So much newspaper coverage, people wanted to do interviews with me. I was quite overwhelmed. And I remember my father called me one morning and said, "Have you seen these pictures of yourself? You look like Mussolini there. You better be careful."
This was a negotiation in which he didn't have very many cards. After all, India was the victorious power. But using his diplomatic skills, he got a reasonably good bargain, which allowed for the return of some 95,000 Pakistani prisoners of war, reestablished normal relations between the two countries. This was very much a formative experience for Benazir. She watched her father operate. She had a diplomatic role as his hostess, and she absorbed many of his lessons of diplomacy.
My father always said my daughter will make me more proud than Indira made her father. So my father always had the idea that I was a chip off the block.
We met when we were both in England, and I was at Cambridge, she was at Oxford. I was struck from the first moment I met her by her force of life.
Harvard was a place where she could really be herself. She wasn't in the limelight. At Oxford, there was a large Pakistani community. She was older, and I think she was thinking about her future career.
It was assumed that she would not go into politics. She did an interview shortly as she was to leave Oxford. The headline was, "No politics for the president's daughter." But at the same time, she had her eye on what was going on in Pakistan.
In 1974, India detonated a nuclear explosion. And so now Pakistan faced India that was 8 times the size and which had nuclear weapons.
Once India got the bomb, the Pakistani military started clamoring and telling Bhutto, "We want nuclear weapons. Otherwise, how can we compete with the Indians?" Bhutto made this famous speech, "We will build the nuclear bomb," he announced in public, even if we have to eat grass for 1,000 years.
Bhutto was persuaded by the Ford administration not to go this path.
Dr. Kissinger actually was a friend of my father's and respected him greatly, and he tried to warn him as a friend. So he said, "I don't want you to be made a horrible example of, and so you should not develop the nuclear device."
But that didn't quite work with Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. It was the nuclear power that essentially broke down Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and the West.
The whole of the West was very, very anti-Pakistan because they thought we were doing an injustice. It was a bad situation.
Like all great charismatic leaders, Bhutto had flaws, he had great strengths but great weaknesses, and very soon he was in trouble with the establishment, with even the people of Pakistan.
His allies became his opponents himself. He started losing traction with everybody who was part of his victory.
Her father had chosen to call elections. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was re-elected. They were contested, and a massive agitation started in Pakistan.
All this turmoil in Pakistan, protests on the street, big rallies against Pakistan People's Party.
He panicked.
He didn't do enough to spread Islam in the country, to appease the mullahs, if you will.
So he thought he would outflank them by pushing through reforms or demands that they wanted. He made Friday the national holiday, not Sunday. He banned alcohol in the country.
His agenda was too wide and too spread out. The large, huge alliance that he had, that pretty much crumbled down.
I'm not arrogant. I would hate to be arrogant or to consider myself to be arrogant. But certainly I am intolerant of certain stupid things.
When you have power and there's only you and you think you're more intelligent than the rest of the country, that's always a mistake.
Because it was my father's birthday. That night there was a dinner in honor of my father. I was told, come and meet the new chief of staff, General Ziaul Haq.
Ziaul Haq was selected and kept as the chief of army staff because he was the least threatening general in Pakistan army. At least that's what Bhutto thought.
My father depended heavily on the reports of inter-services intelligence. So that this choice would make the army very happy.
He frog-leaped Zia over the heads of 5 other generals. Zia was, on the face of it, very humble. That's the phrase often he used, "I am your humble servant." And Bhutto was taken in by this show of deference. And then what had to happen, happened.
मिस्टर भुट्टो की हुकूमत खत्म हो चुकी है। सारे मुल्क में मार्शल लॉ नाफिज कर दिया गया है। कौमी और सूबाई असेंबलियां तोड़ दी गई हैं। सूबाई गवर्नर और वजीर हटा दिए गए।
General Ziaul Haq seized power in April 1977. Basically, there was a general election. Bhutto would have won that election, but his overzealous supporters in the state apparatus rigged that election, which created the atmosphere which permitted the military to come back in. With the green light given by the US, Henry Kissinger had said to Bhutto, "We will make a horrible example out of you."
The charges that were brought against Zulfikar were never proven. They were not warranted. And so this was basically to get rid of him. And then after that, the troubles began for the family.
I was in my 3rd year in university. My brothers had to go back to school. My mother and my father said, even if they try and take you off the plane, if they do whatever, don't, under any circumstances, come out of the airplane. Just stay there and go and finish your education.
He was concerned particularly for the boys, for their safety.
I never knew what was happening to my family. I never knew what was happening to my father. My brother was in Oxford, so I used to go and try and visit him.
They didn't have that proximity over that last 1 year, which Benazir had with her father. Week after week, she'd go to jail to see him, and it was during that period she had these very intense conversations with him about leadership and about the people.
Once her father was toppled and imprisoned, she now became very engaged, very active.
So here we had overnight another charismatic Bhutto.
He gave her the mantle of the party, and in a normal Islamic society they would give it to the eldest son, but Zulfikar Ali Bhutto gave it to the eldest child, the one he thought could best do the job, and it was a woman.
It was a huge ongoing struggle for the clearing of her father's name. Then things went from bad to worse.
If my father is executed, I honestly do not believe we can talk of Pakistan as it exists today. We cannot talk of a viable country. Pakistan cannot stay united. Pakistan will disintegrate.
Mir went around the world to lobby leaders to try and save Zulfikar from the executioner's noose.
Our message to General Zia is that release my father and hold free election and let the people decide the fate of the country.
We have come out against the military regime headed by General Zia-ul-Haq, which we feel is acting in a manner which is prejudicial.
We were so isolated, and I just used to pretend that it's not going to happen.
Zia knew as long as Zulfikar is alive, Zia can never stay president of the country.
What do you think that your father would look back on as his own mistakes?
Perhaps choosing General Zia as Chief of Staff?
Father, very intelligent, Coriolanus in Shakespeare, finally falls out with his own supporters, weakens, and his enemies pounce on him. The whole story of the Bhuttos has strong elements of a Greek tragedy.
They called the jail superintendent and said, "This is the last meeting." And he said, "Yes." He said, "Has the date been fixed?" He said, "Yes." He said, "For when has it been fixed?" He said, "Tonight." My father said to him, "Well, make arrangements for me to shave, to have a bath. It's beautiful earth, and I want to be clean." And he said that tonight I'll be free. My father was very calm, and he talked of family matters. He talked of party matters, and I keep seeing his face. I said that I'd like to hug my father goodbye. He'd been the president, the prime minister. He brought them back from the camps of India. They wouldn't even open the cell doors for me to kiss him goodbye. Said, "This is goodbye until the final meeting." And those were the last words he spoke to either my mother or myself.
Well, I don't want to say much. I came just to tell you that what's the personal tragedy. And they've tried to break our father. They've tortured him for 2 years. They couldn't do that. They tried to ruin his political name, and now they've killed him. We have nothing to be ashamed of. They have buried a martyr today.
Zia's rule proved to be the worst period in Pakistan's history. A fear enveloped the country, and many people said, if they can hang Bhutto, who the hell are we?
I don't know, after my father's death, I came back to Pakistan, and the whole atmosphere changed. I mean, they kept hauling my mother and sister off to different jails. Everything was under martial law order. I mean, they had a martial law order that our last name wasn't allowed to be in the newspapers.
They turned our home into prison, where nobody could enter, where nobody could go out. When you're in detention, it's not the physical aspect which matters, it's the mental. It's having somebody to communicate with.
Zia did not want any activity from the family. So if the brothers are outside the country and the wife and the daughter is in prison, no activity.
Zia was an Islamist. He began a process of Islamicizing Pakistan.
General Zia said, "We are the true defenders. Israel without Judaism would collapse. Pakistan without Islam would collapse."
He imposed Sharia law.
Sharia is a divine, utopian, heavenly code of conduct. Sharia on earth means whatever the leader says Sharia means. But of course, the area in which they had the most devastation was in women's rights, what's often referred to as the hudud laws. The punishment for these crimes is actually mandated by the Quran.
There was this notorious law under which if a woman was raped, she had to produce 4 male witnesses to the penetration. If she couldn't produce that, then she would go to jail for sex outside marriage, which was illegal.
Public hangings, public floggings.
Harsh though they may seem to us, all those punishments are perfectly acceptable under Islamic law.
People are not allowed to travel. People are not allowed to voice their own opinions.
I believe in freedom of thought, freedom of expression.
People are not allowed to voice their ideas. They're not allowed to do anything at all.
It is freedom with responsibility, not freedom for the sake of freedom or free for all.
What I am sitting and doing right now in this drawing room is a crime under martial law regulation.
Then he had this extraordinary break in his favor. The Soviets invaded Afghanistan.
Pakistan was important from the very beginning. For strategic reasons, you only have to look at a map.
I think the administration thought that the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was a major threat to the United States, that the Soviet Union would dominate the northern part of the Persian Gulf, it would threaten Western oil supplies, and the communists would have scored a major victory.
The main task became defeat the Russians, whatever the cost. And that made this squalid dictator into a plucky fighter for freedom. Brzezinski actually went to the Afghan border.
But that land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
A lot of these religious primers, which were teaching kids in the madrasas, you know, all the jihadi rhetoric, Kaf, the letter K, Kaf is for Kalashnikov. All these textbooks were specially printed by the University of Nebraska. Reagan introduced these guys to the press corps once and said, "These are the equivalents of our founding fathers." And some of us watching at the time was sort of joking, which one is Washington? Which one is Jefferson? You know, where's Benjamin Franklin among them?
The two boys, Murtaza and Shahnawaz, were very disillusioned and they went to Afghanistan.
Shahnawaz was the youngest of the 4 kids. They all adored him so much, such a nice, kind kid.
He was always smiling. Benazir always talked about him being incredibly handsome and a great charmer. He wasn't as intense and serious as Murtaza was.
Mir had the arrogance of the man of the family. He needed to feel he was doing something, so there was a lot of sort of talk.
The underground resistance, if you're shot off the street, then you're going to go underneath and blow the hell out of the place. So there's going to be a lot of trouble.
They were trying to build a group from outside the country to overthrow the government of Zia.
There's been a dramatic development in the Damascus hijack today.
The Pakistan government has been claiming that the man behind the hijacking is the eldest son of Pakistan's former president, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Murtaza vowed to avenge their father's death.
The hijacking of the PIA airliner took place, then it had become very, very difficult.
Has Murtaza crossed the line between political activity in exile and terrorism? The Pakistan government says he has.
Benazir's brothers were branded as terrorists.
In the end, the Pakistan government capitulated to the hijackers, agreeing to swap the political prisoners for the hostages aboard the PIA plane.
Benazir was charged with connection to those terrorist brothers. Zia threw her into a Class C cell, the desert of sin. Class C are the lowest quality cells that there are.
I walked up and down and up and down and up and down. What the hell is there to do when you're locked up in solitary confinement?
She had not talked to anyone for several years. When I went to visit her, she could not talk. She would write on a piece of paper whatever she wanted to tell me because her jaws had locked.
It would be so hard, I can't tell you. And my ear is hurting me.
She had some ear complaint and they called a doctor. They said, you're not well and we're going to give you medicine. But the medicine they were giving her, I think, were tranquilizers because my mother noticed she was becoming like a zombie.
I think his basic thought was that he could kill her.
By the time the Afghan war was in full swing, Zia knew that the US couldn't do without him.
The Reagan administration simply let the Pakistani dictator decide how billions of US dollars would be used to fight the Soviets. And Zia gave them to the most extreme Islamic groups.
That is the period when Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI, became a powerful octopus-like agency with a finger in every sphere of public life in the country. Massive spying apparatus, massive budget.
The ISI is the NSA, the CIA, and the Pentagon all rolled into a single body. It is, in some sense, a shadow military force.
The ISI would use enormous funds to actually create organizations which they armed and then used in Afghanistan.
The Mujahideen is the term that we use to describe the diverse groups of militants and fighters, some Afghan, but many from outside of Afghanistan, fighters all over the world who gathered to repel the Soviet invasion.
Osama bin Laden was a part of that movement. He was a particularly well-resourced and effective militia leader.
We thought that defeating the Soviet Union was so important that we didn't care that we were actually supporting Osama bin Laden and people who were his allies.
As far as Pakistan was concerned, it destroyed the social fabric of that country because you had armed groups backed by the military regime running wild in the country. Another of the sort of numerous ironies, the Americans got rid of Bhutto because of the nuclear bomb. Then General Zia, their man, is in power and uses the fact that he's become absolutely necessary for the United States to fight the war in Afghanistan to basically build the bomb. And that is what he did.
I say that it is the right of any developing country to acquire the modern technology. And amongst the modern technology is the nuclear technology. Nuclear technology for peaceful purposes.
The notion that American military intelligence didn't know about it is just nonsense. They knew what was going on very well. It was a price they were prepared to pay.
In December of 1982, General Zia came to Washington. And as part of his visit, he had a lunch with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The only senator who was on time was Pell, his biggest critic. In the very first question, Pell handed him a letter about political prisoners. Benazir was the first name on the list, and he raised Benazir's case, described her conditions of imprisonment. Zia responded by saying, "Oh no, that's not right, Senator. She's now under house arrest, and she lives in a more comfortable house than any of your senators."
You know, our family home in Larkana, they declared it's a sub-jail, so it wasn't like you could come and go as you wished. So I was always going to Home Secretary's office and this one's office and that one's office, begging, can I go and see them?
She was released from prison only because she was in terrible physical shape. She was in danger of dying, and that's why Zia al-Haq let her out. I take it he didn't want to be held accountable for more Bhutto blood, and she went to London.
I went to the airport and there was a sea of people
I asked her this afternoon if, in the eyes of President Zia, she was now conveniently out of the way.
We have not left Pakistan. We have not come out as political refugees or sought political asylum. We are Pakistanis and we'll go back to Pakistan. That's our homeland. That's where we live and that's where we'll die.
She had to restore her health in terms of leading, a more measured life. And there were some happy times for her.
The Bhutto family would go to the south of France on holiday.
Yeah, they were all there. The two brothers, their wives were there. Nusrat was there. Benazir was there. Sanam was there. And they had met that evening or that dinner they had together. And later the next morning, they find Shahnawaz dead. Apparently somebody had poisoned him.
He died in great pain over several hours, his sister-in-law doing nothing to come to his aid. It was a horrible experience for the family.
My heart was pounding. I didn't want to go inside. I looked, and he was lying on the carpet. His hand was outstretched, and he just looked like a sleeping animal. He looked so handsome. He said to me, he's dead. I said, no, try. He said, he's cold. He's been dead for hours. And I shouted, you killed him, you killed him, you killed him.
Without a shadow of doubt, I feel that he was most cruelly, heartlessly murdered.
By who?
Well, we would like the French police to find out, but we think it took place within a political context.
Going back with his body, she saw the love and the devotion of the people, and she realized from that moment onwards she had to set in motion the next phase of her life, which was going back to resume an active career in politics.
My father had a vision of Pakistan as a democratic and progressive nation. My family is committed to his vision of Pakistan. We don't fear anything.
I said to her, you need to come to the United States. Persuade Americans that you're not a dangerous radical. She had a charm offensive.
Ambassador Peter Galbraith asked if we would have a small dinner party for a friend of his that was just getting out of prison. I said, oh, that's intriguing. That was really the first time I met her.
He had a sort of Washington salon, some members of Congress, a whole bunch of journalist friends, and she charmed everybody.
She was speaking quietly. Everyone would sort of lean forward because she was enrapturing.
She would say what she thought, and people would come out of meetings with her saying, my God, I can't believe that she said that. But it served her well because people began to trust her.
She also used her contacts in the Arab world. Libya, for instance, she had this ability to live in both worlds.
There was a groundswell of support that was building against the dictatorship. What was left of the civil society, what was left of the NGOs, all were banding together, demanding a reform.
Until the beginning of this year, General Zia outlawed all political opposition in Pakistan. But now, in a new political climate, the way may soon be clear to challenge him in an election. If that proves the case, then leading that challenge will be Benazir Bhutto.
I wanted to perform Umrah for my father. So this was something that I had wanted to. I didn't know whether I would live or die when I went back. And that's why I wanted to complete my intention.
She wasn't intimidated by generals, by dictators. She really thought she was on a holy mission to bring democracy back to the country.
In Pakistan, supporters of the opposition leader Benazir Bhutto are gathering to welcome her back, promising to overthrow the present leader, General Zia, and to test his claim that democracy has been restored.
She arrived in Pakistan, and suddenly there was a kind of electric shock that went through the body politic of the nation. And she really won the heart of millions of Pakistanis because she was seen as this young, almost frail girl taking on this brutal military dictator with all the authority and the power and the military backing him.
People who had been too scared or who hadn't felt like coming out when Bhutto was hanged came out for her. One of the banners they held up was, "Forgive us, Benazir. Forgive us for not having come out when your father was being hanged."
I think she determined early on that she would never have a personal life, that she would be a political leader, but she functionally wouldn't be a woman. She would never marry, she would never have children. But she came to realize that for her to function in a man's political environment in Pakistan, meetings with men, evenings alone, it was very important for her to be married. So in 1987, a marriage was arranged.
Asif Ali Zardari is a man of considerable personal charm.
He was a playboy. Who could blame him? He did not come from Pakistan's intelligentsia or Pakistan's political background. He came from a modest feudal background with roots in Karachi's urban capital.
We owned cinema halls and our major business was importing foreign movies. Hard to understand, what a hell of a man. So I had the opportunity of watching a lot of movies and dreaming a lot.
She came to London and we met, and I said, "Well, what's he like?" And she said, "He's the only one who wanted to marry me."
She was gorgeous. She was the most populous woman in the world, and I guess I was quite taken up by her.
She was the last person in the world that we thought would be part of an arranged marriage. She was like one of the most independent people that we've ever met.
She was moving toward a position of power in Pakistan. She couldn't very well be seen gallivanting with Western men.
I sent her roses and her favorite chocolates, things I knew about her.
The initial engagement was in my apartment in London.
The whole family I take out for dinners every day. After 7 days, the mother and the other sister and the aunts, cousins, and I all get together and tell her that say yes or no, because we can't keep doing this, so you have to make up your mind.
She was alone so much and she had been through jail, and I thought she needed pampering and she deserved a break, basically.
I remember her saying to me, "My mother picked him, but I fell in love with him as though I had met him across a crowded room."
We had 500,000 people, huge affair, much beyond my imagination.
It was incredibly colourful, almost like something out of Arabian Nights.
It was a great time. All my family were there. My mother was thrilled that my sister was getting married. I think she was the happiest person in Pakistan.
Her wedding was almost like a Bollywood movie. It was not an elitist wedding. People would go in and eat and dance, and it was a wedding that actually turned into a campaign itself.
Nahane ma, ijazat vatandas, shukriya, Jie Bhutto!
So the campaign continued after the wedding as well.
She got the same sort of receptions everywhere, wherever she went. In Karachi, a bigger reception than in Pindi. She got equally impressive reception. And the crowd was so emotionally charged that she could have just asked them to take over and lynch Zia, but she didn't, because she believed that she has to restore the sanctity of vote over bullet.
But my party did not want bloodshed. My party does not want violence, and we again repeated that hear the call of the people and give us a date for immediate election.
Benazir Bhutto today challenged you before leaving Karachi to an election showdown. Could you please give us your reaction?
Chivalry forbids me to challenge a lady.
She was expecting. Zia thought now she's married and she can't do it. He didn't know that my sister's a very determined person.
I travelled with her a lot during the elections, and she was pregnant, during some of the campaign. And she cleverly had fooled General Zia because she knew they would get her medical records and find out when the baby was due and time the election exactly for that so she wouldn't be able to campaign. So she got her records switched.
I visited Pakistan with part of a group of Democratic Party officials and met with General Zia. He looked at me and he said, "The worst mistake of my life was allowing your friend to live." And I related this story to Benazir, and she looked at me without any expression and she said, "He's right."
President Zia was on board a C-130 transport plane heading from Bahawalpur to Lahore. Shortly after takeoff, his plane exploded, killing the president and all those aboard.
It was entirely an army affair. His flight was managed by the military, security was military, everything was military. No civilian could go near it.
The death of Zia-ul-Haq, which has never been explained, box of mangoes that exploded on his C-130 Hercules and killed the American ambassador to Pakistan, the president of Pakistan, Zia-ul-Haq, the chief military attaché of the US Embassy. And out of this came pressure for democratic government.
No one was going to stop her from there onwards. It was an unstoppable campaign.
The elections were in November '89 and she had the baby in September.
The crowds surround the hospital. And while everything is happening, you can hear Jiye Bhutto, all about. And then the first grandson of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto is born. And she becomes Prime Minister 3 months later.
They danced in the streets as the final returns came in, returns that gave Benazir Bhutto's Pakistan People's Party a nearly 2-to-1 majority over any other political group.
People of Pakistan have elected the Pakistan People's Party with the largest single majority in the entire country. Even my own husband thought I was under delusions that I could beat a military dictator. And he thought that when she wakes up and finds out that it's all wrong and she can't, then I'll be there to console her. Little knowing that I was the one who had to console him when I won.
At a very young age, 35, Benazir Bhutto became not just the youngest prime minister of a Muslim-majority state, more importantly, she became the first woman.
मैं बेनज़ीर भुट्टो
सच के दिल से हल्फ उठाती हूँ कि मैं मुसलमान हूँ अल्लाह ताला की वहदत
First day when she takes oath as the Prime Minister and we walk out of that hall, she says, I have avenged my father today.
On the first day in office, she freed all political prisoners. She made the media free of censorship. She allowed for student unions. It was a fundamental opening up of Pakistan after a decade of repression.
Tiny things improved the lives of people. She was the one who gave water, drinking water to these villages. She was the one who brought electricity.
She built 48,000 primary and secondary schools. In terms of health care, she ended polio in Pakistan, completely eliminated it.
One thing that Benazir was very proud of was her women's police stations. It sounds like nothing, but for a woman in Pakistan, it can spell a dreadful fate to be in an all-male police station.
She had great force to change not only Pakistan, but change the world and change how Islamic women viewed themselves and how Islamic men viewed Islamic women and how children viewed their mothers and how brothers viewed their sisters and how sisters viewed themselves.
When I first became Prime Minister, I wanted to show that a woman could be as good as a man. Mrs. Golda Meir and Mrs. Thatcher and Mrs. Indira Gandhi were all known for being strong as men. But I think it's important to be a woman because a woman brings nurturing aspects.
Bakhtaur was born when Benazir Bhutto was seated Prime Minister. I remember she chaired a cabinet meeting late in one afternoon and she gave birth to her daughter the next morning.
She believed in equality, and she treated herself like that. Like, a lot of the times you'd come in the room and you'd see this leader, you know, this woman, and all these men following behind. And, you know, she didn't see herself as any different.
President Bush had her as the first state visitor of his administration.
Members of the Congress, and I deem it a high honor and personal pleasure to present to you Her Excellency Mohtama Benazir Bhutto, Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan.
We set as our focus reconciliation, not retribution. Some claimed to fear revenge against the murderers and the torturers, revenge against those who subverted constitutional law. But, ladies and gentlemen, there was no revenge. For them and for dictators across the world, democracy is the greatest revenge.
She had the position of Prime Minister, but she had very little power. She learned the details of the Pakistani nuclear program from the United States. She had a plurality in the National Assembly, not a majority. Second, the president was a crony of Zia-ul-Haq's and was very hostile to her. The military was very suspicious of her and completely unwilling to accept orders from a young woman.
A then general in uniform asks for an appointment with me and says the army doesn't like saluting a woman, so if she could make you Prime Minister, we would accommodate and there wouldn't be a problem. The people of Pakistan have voted Benazir Bhutto in as Prime Minister of Pakistan. What about them? And he gets really offended.
There were attempts by the ISI in terms of public relations to damage her. And one was the creation of this title for Asif of Mr. 10%. This is 3 weeks before the election.
Asif Zardari earned the nickname Mr. 10% because no business transaction was done in Pakistan without his involvement.
That's when I become politicized.
Corruption is what dogs all of these politicians.
Asif's reputation, I think, was permanently damaged from this campaign.
They could not, on the other hand, wish away her base of support. Then they tried to contain her influence by supporting rival politicians.
Nawaz Sharif was essentially introduced into politics during the period of General Zia-ul-Haq.
He was Zia's protege and became a player.
He came onto the national scene as part of a coalition of Islamic parties that was put together by the Inter-Services Intelligence to oppose Benazir Bhutto.
Mr. Nawaz Sharif became Chief Minister of Punjab, and from day one, he started defying the orders of the federal government.
The PMLN, controlling the Punjab, was clearly trying to take over.
So her entire period in power was spent fighting battles.
Unsurprisingly, within 18 months of being in office, she hadn't solved all of the problems in Pakistan and was certainly vulnerable to political criticism from a lot of different quarters.
There was no plan. The entire focus was on getting Zia out and getting elected. And once you actually got there, you know, that there wasn't a plan.
Her whole focus was on the struggle for democracy, for getting rid of the dictatorship. And frankly, I don't think her party thought much about what they would do once they were in power. And anyhow, they were just barely in power. So they really tied her hands in terms of what she could do.
The ISI was very active. Their sole aim was to displace her. They did not want her to stay there. They didn't even want to give her a month.
She always used to say then that we were in office, not in power. Shortly after that, her government was removed by the army.
Disqualification is really very meaningless. I won't be the first leader to be disqualified.
So very rapidly they removed her from power, and Nawaz Sharif came in.
Well, after 20 months in office, she was deposed, ostensibly for corruption. But that's what they say about everyone. It becomes an excuse when a government is inconvenient.
I do not believe that she was personally corrupt. But I also know that the standard way to go after Pakistani politicians is to allege corruption.
It was incredibly disappointing because people had had all these hopes.
It was a time of acute disappointment for Pakistanis, I think, because she didn't do very much.
My first term, we were very inexperienced. Certainly we made mistakes, but we were sincere in our intent, sincere in our purpose.
I mean, we are expecting one individual, and that individual who I now think was alone, totally alone. Yes, she had this political body, but she was head and shoulders above everybody else. Maybe that was her tragedy. That was the tragedy of the Bhuttos, that nobody around them could match them.
The PPP under Benazir's first government became a family business. It became a Zardari-owned enterprise.
I get arrested after the first government falls.
He was being held hostage to her political career, and we knew that from the very beginning.
Her husband has consistently been demonized. It was made to seem that she was a princess, he was a playboy. Every little thing, whether it was right or wrong, would just get excessive play.
They offered so many times for these trumped-up charges to be dropped if she would agree to not be in politics. And he would have no part of it. And of course, she wouldn't either, but she was so proud that he in jail said absolutely not, no.
Bilawal and Bakhtar, who was a little baby, come to visit me in prison. And obviously we couldn't tell him what prison was, she was too young for that. And we would always say, Baba, your father's in his office, because the meeting place would be the office of the superintendent of the jail. So one day, Bilawal holds my hand and he says, come with me. I don't know how old you were, maybe 3. So how much does it hurt that you can't do that?
Sacrifice that really defines Benazir and Asif as individuals, and sacrifice is the word that describes their marriage. What I saw develop in that relationship was really quite amazing.
Soviet occupation of Afghanistan is officially over. The Soviet defeat has been fully consummated. The last Soviet troops have gone home. The deeply scarred Afghans will now be left to shed each other's blood all on their own.
I asked Charlie Wilson, what is going to happen to all these toys that you leave behind? So he practically puts his hands together like this and says, well, the Mujs are going to fight among themselves and we shall buy them for the price of shape.
One of the saddest things is that after the Mujahideen dislodged the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, using Pakistan really as a transit point, the United States really kind of turned its back on Pakistan.
The U.S. was on the next bus out of town. We didn't stay to try to really reconstruct civil society, to build a democratic society. We were just gone.
We were left alone. Warlordism started. All the Mujahideen who were there, brought by us from all over the world, 20, 30,000 of them. Where were they? They were all holed up. 4 million refugees came into Pakistan. Did anyone talk of resettling them? You needed money to resettle them. Nobody is doing anything of the sort. So therefore, they coalesce and become Al-Qaeda.
Benazir was the one talking about the danger that was posed by the Taliban and Al-Qaeda.
All across Pakistan, secretly, cells have been operating, which have been trying to undergo militant training. And we don't want that because we feel that this is a threat to Pakistan.
Benazir came on her first state visit to the United States, and she spent some time alone with Bush 41. And she told me one of the things that she said is, Mr. President, I fear we have created a Frankenstein.
Her message largely fell on deaf ears.
She was consigned to the political wilderness, but Benazir Bhutto is back. Her supporters call her conqueror of dictatorship, leader of democracy, queen of Asia. But now she faces a new enemy, her own family. The fight is over a dead man's legacy, that of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, Benazir's father. The challengers for the title are his widow Nusrat and his eldest son Murtaza. The defending champions, Benazir's husband Asif and Benazir herself.
It wasn't just that the Bhuttos were contending with the Sharifs, it was that the Bhuttos were contending among themselves.
Murtaza sends a message from Syria. He wants to be politically active in Pakistan. So she says that I can't afford your positions. Your positions have always been very extreme.
She said, please don't. You will make things difficult for me.
He stands for election, but he's not allowed to travel out of Syria. He sends his papers through my mother-in-law.
I could not forever base my politics on the remote possibility that it would hurt my sister's politics.
There was always a tension that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had selected his oldest child and not his oldest son.
It was a family feud in a sense, two families, each believing that they had the right to inherit the kingdom.
On the 19th of October 1993, Benazir was sworn in as the Prime Minister of Pakistan for the second time, her mother at her side.
What is really, I think, fundamental in assessing Benazir's legacy as Prime Minister is how she did in her second term, when inexperience and youth were no longer the excuses.
She had broader vision, and I know this time she'd given a lot of thought as to what she might be able to accomplish.
She wrote a book that was meant to be a political manifesto. Reconciliation was to be published after she had become a prime minister.
It's a mandate for freedom, for dignity, for equality, for hope, for entering the 21st century with technology and science.
The woman would go out of her way using the Quran to debunk the jihadist myth on women, on other religions, on tolerance, on democracy. It was such a strong denunciation of the jihadist view of Islam.
The conservatives, the religious groups in Pakistan saw Benazir as a threat to Islam itself. She did represent in and of herself the reconciliation of these various strands of ideas.
She brought fiber optics to Pakistan. She brought cell phones to Pakistan. She brought CNN and BBC to Pakistan. During the Middle Ages, when Europe was in the Dark Ages, the great universities of Islam were producing all the culture of the world and everything from art to algebra. And it was a very open and tolerant society. Well, that was her view of Islam.
She, I think, really dispelled a lot of the myths about women in leadership roles. Certainly, she dispelled the myth that a woman can't be tough, because she was incredibly tough.
As someone who claims to be a feminist, she was traditional. This is a woman who didn't shake hands with men, and who covered her hair, and who believed that women in a certain post should be married.
She got so many women to start acting and start going into and making a change and trying to make a difference.
She wasn't a feminist. I mean, I don't know why people think she was, but she wasn't.
Benazir does not repeal the Hudud ordinances. And the Hudud ordinances are the most violent pieces of legislation against women in this country.
Considering the fact that Benazir had to overcome these Sharia ordinances that so profoundly affect women, it is a miracle that she rose to the position of Prime Minister.
The reality was that she needed this support of one of the religious parties to stay in power, and they would not have supported removing this.
It was moderation, to have in Islam an alternative to this radicalism, to have a kind of Islam where a woman could be elected head of one of the largest and most powerful Islamic countries.
Murtaza and Bibi have a falling out long time ago.
I've had political differences with my brother right back to 1981. He led one kind of political movement, and I led another kind of political movement.
Now, Murtaza chooses to come when we are in government, and there are pending cases against him in all of Pakistan.
My mother herself was telling me from the beginning that you must come back and face the cases in court.
There were over 100 cases that Zia-ul Haq had filed against Murtaza and Shahnawaz, anti-state activities.
I said to him and my mother that you do know that if you come back now, the law of the land requires that you will have to go to jail. And they both said yes, and they were prepared for that.
He returned to the country in November of 1993, and he was arrested at the airport. He spent 8 months in prison in Karachi, clearing his name through the courts.
The second time she came to power, she was much more confident, but by that time she'd changed. I felt that she'd changed a great deal.
She was a figurehead, because power was the end goal. When you look at Benazir Bhutto's governments and Benazir Bhutto's policies, that's the only thing that is constant.
Accusations, accusations, accusations. And I say those accusations were lies, they were unfounded. Of course I had the reins of power. I was Prime Minister.
It was a more aggressive government than the first. Having lost power once before, having been denied her right to rule, Benazir did not take the same chances the second time. The corruption was more extensive and it was grander.
This is all part of a smear campaign against her.
I think they used power to make money. And, she then decided to formalize it by making her husband Minister for Investment.
The word corruption is an easy word to bandy about. When you don't like someone, you don't like their politics, and you have a massive propaganda machine at your disposal, you use that to taint political leaders.
It's not a government, it is Alibaba and 40 thieves.
She tolerated a lot of people and their shenanigans. In fact, Murtaza comes to our house where we try and talk that it's not safe for you here and you have a security risk against him. Obviously, he has his own position. He doesn't listen to us. And then this incident happens.
We were waiting for my father to come home and we heard the firing. There were 70 to 100 policemen at the scene. They were in sniper positions in the trees. When he exited, they started firing.
The story which I was told was that he and Zardari had fallen out very badly.
I was devastated. We were both devastated.
I've never seen Benazir so distraught, so deeply in mourning. The tears would pour from her eyes.
People do say she was implicated, but I simply don't believe it. I absolutely don't believe it.
Benazir bears the moral responsibility of her brother's murder. Absolutely.
Benazir always talked about Fatima with love. She would say to me, she's just been poisoned. This is my brother's daughter. I love her. I love her like she's my own body.
Everybody says she's just like me. That's the amazing thing. I still send them love and prayers and hope that one day their eyes will open.
I really feel that his daughter keeps blaming my sister, but really she's blaming her for my brother's not being successful. I mean, if my sister wasn't in politics, there would be no question. There's no article that I've read about my niece where it doesn't say Benazir Bhutto's niece. It never says Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's granddaughter. It never says Murtaza Bhutto's daughter. My niece is nothing without Benazir.
She's coming out of her hurt, so I can understand that.
Murtaza's widow accused Benazir's government and her husband Asif Zardari of the murder. Benazir alleged the President Farouk Laghari had had a hand in it. Relations between the Prime Minister and the President had reached breaking point. In November, the President dismissed Benazir's government.
Nawaz Sharif was himself Prime Minister for the second time and was intent on destroying once and for all Benazir Bhutto and her husband Asif Ali Zardari.
So the government arrested Mr. Zardari on multiple charges, which included the murder of Benazir's brother.
The fact that I'm put into that case is done to malign our government. Who's lost the most in Mir Murtaza's murder? We.
Who brought the charges against Mr. Zardari? Everybody who held and wielded power during this period.
When her government fell and Nawaz became a prime minister, there were these cells that he controlled that would bring these charges against Benazir and Asif, and she would go from court to court, and he would go from court to court.
They were in and out of Karachi jail. I mean, that was like a home away from home in a way at that time.
But what they didn't realize that I'm a fighter and she was a fighter and we'd fight to a last breath.
Yes, Mr. Zardari is a businessman. He does business. Other people do business. They're entitled to do business. But where is the law violated?
I don't know if you can plant something in the New York Times, but there was a very serious article on Benazir's millions in which Zardari was implicated.
The House of Graf pretty succinctly in 3 or 4 words summed up what I tried to say in 7,000 or 8,000 words, that there was corruption going on, bank statements in the name of Benazir Bhutto and her husband.
These stories were planted by the intelligence services in order to justify dismissal of elected government.
You know, we are an imperfect business, but we were very confident that we had nailed the case.
People don't realize, you're being attacked from all sides. Her husband was in jail. She had 3 little children.
And this was political victimization.
They were putting pressure on the judge to take even her ancestral property, what she's inherited from her grandfather and her father.
She was harassed to the last core. In fact, she went into exile with the permission of the court.
I had to look after my children. I didn't know how they would be taken care of. My mother's suffering from Alzheimer's. She lives with me. So both for personal and political reason, I thought that my freedom of movement was essential.
My mother was obviously a very prominent person in my life. She was the only parent I had for 8 years.
When we moved to Dubai, my mum had to go for speeches and things a lot.
Where you would write letters?
I mean, we'd write her letters when we were kids and just put it under her door.
And assume that it was
mail.
going to her.
So when she came back, she'd get all these letters.
There were 2 goals for the paid speeches. One was to get the message out, to keep her relevant. But the other reason was that she was a working woman, and she was supporting her family. Asif was in jail, and some of the money that was set aside was for Bilwal's college education. This did not seem like a woman who had unlimited sources of money at all. I could assure you of that.
When I was elected Prime Minister for the second time in 1993, Pakistan was on the threshold of being declared a terrorist state. The first attack on the World Trade Towers had already taken place. My government understood the potential for the destabilization of the region.
In 1996, when the Taliban took over our neighboring Afghanistan, there were only 3 countries in the world that recognized it: the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. And Benazir, as a supposedly democratic feminist prime minister, extended her country's recognition, support, and aid to the Taliban in Afghanistan.
It's terribly inaccurate and unfair to say that she was a supporter of the Taliban. She was some woman who wanted very much to contain the Taliban and thought that there could be a political solution that they had to be part of.
The truth is, Pakistan is a military state, and those kinds of issues are dealt with by an increasingly independent ISI.
The Pakistanis believed they needed these Islamist groups in order to prevent India from circling around and taking control of Afghanistan, their neighbor.
There was a military concept called strategic depth, which really depended on a pro-Pakistan Afghanistan to give Pakistan depth to actually retreat if invaded by the Indians again.
The people of Pakistan celebrated the birth of the Islamic bomb.
Most Pakistanis believe that they deserve a nuclear weapon. And if for no other reason, they need a nuclear weapon because India has a nuclear weapon.
The military in Pakistan has complete control over security policy. Prime ministers, including Benazir Bhutto, Nawaz Sharif, they were mere visitors of nuclear facilities. They did not have control over it.
Whether a president or a dictator is in charge, the military is in charge of Pakistan.
Nawaz Sharif appointed Jalal Musharraf Chief of Army Staff. So they worked together for about roughly, I would say, 10 months before Jalal Musharraf deposed the elected government and became the ruler himself.
Having accused Nawaz Sharif of an assassination attempt, Musharraf used that pretense in order to take control of the Pakistani state. Pakistan, of course, has had a number of military coups in its brief history, and Musharraf's coup was very much in line with the previous coups.
I wish to inform you that the armed forces have moved in as a last resort to prevent any further destabilization.
Pakistan People's Party has been struggling to take military out of politics, and the fact that General Musharraf wears a uniform blurs the distinction between civilian and democratic rule.
In order to fight back against the political challenges that he was facing from Benazir Bhutto, Musharraf added an addendum to the constitution saying that a prime minister could only have 2 tenures. And of course, since both Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif had already been prime minister twice, that seemed to preclude the possibility of them becoming prime minister again.
But I think he's scared of me because I symbolize democracy, and he's scared of the people of Pakistan. He wants to keep in place an order that would deprive the people of Pakistan of opportunity for education, for health.
For 11 years of my childhood, my father wasn't with us, so it was my mother who primarily brought us up.
Every Friday we sort of had family day, but when it came to 7 o'clock, that was like family dinner time. So no matter what my mom was doing, you know, she could be having, you know, some president, some prime minister, whatever it was.
She would be like, sorry,
I'm sorry, it's 7
family
o'clock.
time.
It's dinner time with my kids.
She did thank God for the time that she did spend in exile so that she did get to spend time with us. We spent much more time with her while in exile than we ever did as she was prime minister.
And since my dad was away in prison, we were not left alone at the time, but we stuck together because of that.
Obviously, when she was in exile and he was in prison, they didn't see each other for a very, very long time, and that was extremely difficult for her and for the kids.
We'd still talk to him all the time. We would send him letters and embarrassing drawings that we would make for him, and we'd always call him on his birthday, or he would call us on our birthday.
You know, they grew up without a father. Nothing could bring that, nothing could give that back to them. That was taken away from them for political reasons, for no other reasons. She would tell me how lonely she was and how difficult it was to live out of a suitcase and how difficult it was to be away from the children for months and months at a time. And she said, but that's the nature of my life. And, you know, sometimes she would cry. And, you know, she would never cry in public. No one ever saw it. No one ever saw it.
She would still make sure that we knew that he's going to come back here, he will come back, we're going to be fine, we're all together. She'd always remind us of that.
This is what this family sacrificed for Pakistan, for democracy.
By virtually every index, social, economic index, Pakistan has made absolutely woeful progress.
Who's helping Pakistan manage in that area? Nobody.
You can't have a functioning democracy in a country where people cannot read and write.
You can always gauge the political situation in Pakistan by the number of madrasas that exist in the villages and the rural areas.
The government relinquished its responsibility in providing education, health, housing, and social services to our people. And parents who were desperate to house their children, feed them and clothe them, handed them over to the political madrasas. The political madrasas did house, clothe, and feed the children, but they also provided the poison of hatred.
Half the population of 175 million is below the age of 18. This is the biggest recruitment pool for the militants.
The Pakistani intelligence service would funnel volunteers into Osama's camps and use his facilities. Osama bin Laden was able to operate with impunity.
Benazir knew exactly that the elements of the Mujahideen that we had empowered were Western haters, and their concept of jihad was going to expand beyond Afghanistan, and we were next on the list.
Once September 11th had happened,
And given Pakistan's particular relationship with the Taliban and with Al-Qaeda, it was really important to get Pakistan reoriented. It was Rich Armitage, the Deputy Secretary of State, who really had to go and convince the Pakistanis that they had to make a strategic shift.
Musharraf made a very moving speech approximately 10 days after the planes hit the towers, which he practically wept, and he said, "We have no choice. We must be partners to the United States in this."
There certainly is a disappointment and disenchantment with the United States, but it has not come out of nowhere. Its correction means doing justice.
The Bush administration totally misjudged the political situation in Pakistan. Musharraf really basically sold George Bush 43 a bill of goods. Musharraf convinced President Bush that he was the only thing standing in the way of a nuclear-armed Ayatollah taking over Pakistan. And that was never the case.
I remember being in Pakistan soon after 9/11 and talking to quite senior people, and they said the Americans are friends again, we can build strength again, and they then collaborated. But the problem for them now was that some of the people they recruited to fight these wars against the Russians were genuine. I mean, they may be slightly nutty, but they did believe in it. So now to say to these people, you have to completely turn around, and our new enemy is Islam and the Islamic terrorists and the war on terror, wasn't an easy thing to pull off.
We are being blamed. We are being blamed for terrorism as being the source and cause of terrorism. We are not the source, we are not the cause.
We're now talking about a state which has at least half a dozen nuclear weapons and no doubt is intent on producing more.
The Pakistani nuclear program was a national asset. This was the country's most important military program, and A.Q. Khan was the head of it. A.Q. Khan, with the support of the Pakistani government of the day of Musharraf, was providing nuclear technology to Iran, to North Korea, to Libya. Clearly, this was not a rogue operation. Clearly, it was a Pakistani government operation.
How could Khan get planes to bring things back and forth? How could Khan leave the country? He couldn't even leave the country. He had to ask for permission. Of course, he could hide it by saying, I'm going on a religious pilgrimage, for example, and you'd get the permission. But how many religious pilgrimages could he make to a country like North Korea?
She was in Dubai, and she was anxious to find a way to return to Pakistan to redeem herself and to redeem her party in national politics.
Military rule is the cause of the anarchic situation in Pakistan. Military rule is not the solution.
She made the world understand from all her lectures and all her interactions with leaders all around the world that she and democracy is a better ally than a dictator can ever be.
Well, in fact, some of this had come from the Pakistanis themselves. They believed, and I think rightly, that the best alternative for Pakistan would be to bridge democratic, non-extremist forces together. But we started very quietly early on, just talking to Benazir, talking to Musharraf about what that would take.
Finally, Asif Zardari got released from all the cases. One day judgment was announced acquitting him in the case.
17 years of marriage and 11 years of incarceration, and so you can imagine we've hardly had any time with each other.
We were so excited. We were like hoping to meet him like straight away and everything. So we were waiting and waiting for him to come. And when he did, we were so happy to be like a family again.
Asif was in jail for 11 total years, and he had a very bad heart attack in prison under these conditions, but he would not give in. The ultimate question was, how could this man who was accused of so many things not be convicted of anything?
11.5 years in prison, no conviction, and a lot of innuendo and guilt by association.
as it was clear that the terms were coming together for her return, and I got involved to make sure that it really would lead to an election alternative in which civilian government could return to Pakistan.
While the negotiations were going on, Musharraf got weaker and weaker, and Pakistan became more and more unstable politically.
Go! Go, Musharraf! Go! Go, Musharraf! Go!
Thousands of lawyers are still protesting on the streets of Pakistan cities. The former head of the Supreme Court, who was ousted by Musharraf, issued a call for lawyers to continue their protests.
A feud began over the legitimacy of Musharraf's rule. Musharraf, who reigned for most of his regime under emergency law, used his emergency powers to remove the Chief Justice from power. And that really precipitated, I think, a question of legitimacy for Musharraf's rule.
These events made Musharraf more desperate, and they also convinced Benazir that she had a role to play, to go back, and that role would be complicated and would require real national leadership.
I think he knew that she had to come back. Ultimately, if there was going to be a democratic alternative that involved both Musharraf and Benazir Bhutto, she was going to have to come back.
Bhutto is set to land in her power base Karachi on October 18 after more than 8 years in exile. Thousands of followers from the Pakistan People's Party are expected to greet her.
She was truly joyous about this whole enterprise, both to redeem her role in her family's narrative, to emulate her father's bravery and ultimately his sacrifice, and also to restore herself to the center of Pakistani national life, to write a last chapter.
Our doors are open to all the political leaders and all the political parties in a search for consensus in Pakistan.
She kept saying, do you know, in 8 hours from now, I'm going to be here, in 10 hours from now.
And this time, I'm going to be in my house at this time. I'm going to be there. Oh my gosh, I'm going to be in Pakistan.
Did I give the children pep talks?
She knew what she was doing, and she spoke to us, and we understood what she had to do.
She reminded us that Allah is going to protect her and protect us, and that she will always come back and visit us from Pakistan.
Ameen.
And they will come and visit me when they get their holidays in the winter, won't you?
She had a life that a lot of people would have taken, and yet she decided that it was better to leave that behind and step into this uncertainty.
I'm unaware of the details of the security arrangement, but I think the biggest protection comes from God. And God willing, all will go well.
There were lots of discussions about how her security might take place. It was not going to just be the government, but it was always going to be very dangerous.
We dropped her off at the airport, and all the press were there. We had to portray this normal, strong image, but inside we were like, oh my God, what's going to happen?
She was genuinely happy that she was going home.
I'm homeward bound.
She flew in on this flight from Dubai with suborders, an equally large number of journalists. It was a chaotic scene. She walked down the steps and she stopped.
She says, I love the air of Pakistan. She had a breeze on her face and she loved it.
Tears fell from her eyes. There was a grandness about it, a scale. It was a spectacle like you've never seen.
There in front of us was this massive humanity.
People gathered either side of the road, on trees, in buildings.
And I think she was very moved. She stood up, proud in front of the bus, flanked by her party stalwarts.
They'd made a special area for her that was bulletproof, and she never, in the entire journey, went behind that.
I'm calling up from here everybody and anybody I can get to. Let her go in.
I was with my father and he's like, get her behind the glass.
My father was
Why isn't she going behind the
crazy.
glass?
And we inched and inched and inched, and she was out there waving here, waving there. And then gradually, dusk came.
We turned off at this Stargate into the main road. And she pointed out to me that the street lights were going off in sequence as we drove along, which seemed very suspicious. And then just suddenly there was this sound.
And I was literally sort of blown off this chair that I was sitting on.
That first bomb wasn't very big, and I've been in Afghanistan when there have been suicide bombs, and often there are two. We were all thrown this huge sort of wave of hot air.
We were showered with, it felt like sort of heavy rose petals, but in fact it was human flesh. I don't think we realized the scale of it until the numbers started coming in and it was 30 dead, 40 dead, 60 dead. It was terrible.
Just hours after she returned from exile abroad, the former Pakistani Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto has narrowly escaped an assassination attempt.
While I'm not blaming the government for the assassination attacks on me at this stage, nonetheless, we need to have an inquiry as to why the street lights had been shut.
Her primary reaction to the first attack was her belief that it was state-sponsored.
And we tried so hard to get more protection from Musharraf, just a protection that a former prime minister is entitled to. And we're rebuffed and rebuffed and rebuffed.
Whatever was done was more than the maximum. And any aspersion on me, I take very, very strong exception to it.
The choice is between the jihadis and the elements within the administration. The CIA named Baitullah Masood. The jihadis usually boast about it. The guy who the CIA is accused has denied it completely.
Bear in mind, her father, two of her brothers, now herself, had been in mortal combat with the Pakistan state since she was young enough to remember. And she knew exactly what she wanted to do. She was going to play it the way her father did.
After October 18th, she came back to this house, and she came back and saw us for just like 2 days. But we still were happy to see her because we got to see her again, we got to hug her again. And she kept on telling us that life is in God's hands. If I die, it's God's choice.
I beg her not to go back.
It was just not an option for her not to go back. There was a problem that needed solving, and she was the only solution. Well, the best solution.
I think she knew that there were risks. There were risks, of course, by going back, but I think she believed in the people.
You know, it was 1 month before my 18th birthday, so I saw her the night before she was going to leave, and she said, I want to wish you happy birthday in advance. And I said, don't wish me in advance, wish me in January. And she said, I'm wishing you now. And after she was gone, I found this necklace in her drawer. It said, happy 18th birthday. So I feel like she was prepared.
She kept on telling me, happy birthday, happy birthday. I'm like, why are you telling me now? She's like, what do you want for your birthday? I said, I want you to come back. She's like, I'll try my best.
Before I get up to speak, there's always a sense of anticipation. And there's also a bracing for what may come. I know my foes are waiting for me to slip. You don't know then who can be amongst them. There may be somebody there with a bullet.
I think she felt very strongly, because of her religion, that you die when your time is, and that there was nothing really she could do to alter that. So I think that gave her strength.
As I get up, I feel the love of the crowd come towards, and I feel completely protected. My nervousness drops, my apprehension drops. I no longer care for bullets because I feel in a crowd like this, no bullet can hit me. I just feel invincible.
In Sufi literature, the Sufi looks forward to death because the Sufi is really saying, I'm going to meet my beloved, the beloved being God. So there is no fear. There is only joy and there's only compassion.
After the speech, I was in my thoughts, alone. And suddenly I felt that in this crowd, in this rush, I could feel the martyrs come with me. They're all walking together, and that it was not lonely. So I could almost feel, and it would make me feel lighter and lighter. And I really felt elevated, you know. I just felt myself rise almost inside me, my soul or my spirit.
We were all in this house. Me and my brother were in that room and my father's room back there. We were watching the TV, and all we knew is that something happened, and that's when you knew we had to go, no matter what.
Let's arrange a plane. While somebody's arranging a plane, I come back here, and the television announces she's dead.
We saw in the news, we saw how everyone reacted.
On CNN, it had a picture with the date of her birth in 2007. So, and my wife and I, we cried.
When they heard Benazir died, lots of people came out angry onto the streets. And the slogan they were chanting in Urdu was America ne kutta pala vardi wala, which literally translated means America trained its dog, the one in uniform, the one in uniform.
I went into my office and the press started calling a lot. And then I realized the email.
This past October, Bhutto sent an email to her longtime friend in Washington, her U.S. spokesman, Mark Siegel. Addressing the danger she faced in her homeland, Bhutto wrote these words, and let me quote them precisely. "Nothing will, God willing, happen. Just wanted you to know, if it does, in addition to the names in my letter to Musharraf of October 16th, I would hold Musharraf responsible."
It's the question, who will rid me of this turbulent politician? You ask the question, you don't give the order.
You ordered them to wash away the crime scene. It's criminal. We have never had the right to ask questions.
The government says she fractured her skull on the car's sunroof. But in the final photo, the explosion hasn't yet happened, and Miss Bhutto has already dropped inside her car. Her friends say the government's version is a lie. She was shot.
The sniper moves in to within a few feet of Bhutto, who is greeting her supporters. He fires 3 shots. The last bang is that of the suicide bomber, blowing himself up.
And at the site of the attack, a bullet found while we were there. Benazir Bhutto's supporters believe the government has something to hide. The anger, the unanswered questions, fueling Pakistan's instability.
Martyrdom means standing up for justice, against tyranny, at all costs, prepared to sacrifice your life, your possessions, your family, everything, so as long as the principle of justice and of compassion are maintained.
She was never interested in the moment. She was interested in the light at the end of the tunnel and history itself.
When I get up to speak, I usually start slowly and then I build up. I like to come up with arguments. And I talk of the contrast. I talk of what we did, say Pakistan we inherited. Then I come to how we built it up. And we built it up because we had your strength, your support, your confidence. The importance of the people in developing a society. I look at the people, because when I look at them, then I can feel that strength just run into my body. So I feel strong, I feel more determined, and I feel that when I have this strength with me, then I can move any mountain. It just seemed to me as I looked out and just saw a sea of humanity, that to fight for the truth is important, because the day does come when you see the response to your struggle.
दिला तीर बिजा ए दुश्मनती दिला तीर बिजा ए दुश्मनती उताई शादत में पार बलो जाना उताई शादत में पार बलो जाना दिला तीर बिजा ए दुश्मनती दिला तीर बिजा ए दुश्मनती उताई शादत में पार बलो जाना
You millions nowhere, mother better than how you raised your children. Through our life, our light, our strength, and our guide told me how to behave, how to get better grades, made a strong and choked us by the way that you spoke, by the way that you spoke, by the way that you spoke. There's nobody like you, my mother so vital, a mother to the nation, my life's inspiration. We're the strongest and choked us by the way that you spoke, by the way that